Evening, friends. Welcome to Pendle Hill. So glad you made it out this blustery February evening for a real treat. We're so glad to welcome back to Pendle Hill Sarah Ruden, who was a resident student here, but not known to the rest of the world as she is as a classics scholar and master translator. Her books include Virgil's Aeneid, Apuleius's Golden Ass, and the Oresteia by Aeschylus, among others. Lysistrata, I think, is in there, and what's our favorite one? That's the
Golden Ass.
The Golden Ass. Yes, there we are.
The Metamorphosis, same thing.
Yes.
She very recently published a new translation of the Confessions of St. Augustine, which I highly recommend. And she also, more pertinent to this evening's discussion, she wrote a book of her own about translating. And as a Quaker by convincement, I think those of you who are Quaker in our audience this evening will find that her ability to draw out the context, the language, the rhetoric of the times in which the Bible is using these terms is illuminated by that context, that rhetoric, for modern readers, so that we can appreciate how those devices and the language itself might speak to us better today. She wrote The Face of Water, a translator on beauty and meaning in the Bible. She also wrote a book about Paul Among the People, the Apostle reinterpreted and reimagined in his own time in 2010, that provides a fresh look at Paul in terms of his standing as a Roman citizen and against the empire in ways that illuminate his letters as well. This leads me into an advertisement. As you know, I do these at the beginning of our evening. For those of you who are interested, our Director of Education, Francisco Burgos, who has just recently returned from Central America, is going to be leading a 5-week study session for those of you who are more or less local, that will be meeting in the Furbank Library on Wednesday evenings between 7:30 and 9. And we're going to be using materials in the Challenge of Paul that were crafted and put together by John Dominic Cross, and I know many of you were present for his lectures here last August. And you're invited to register for that. We have a nice, good-sized group for some intimate looks at Paul in his historical context and his rhetoric and language as well. I should remind you that we always have our first Monday lectures. Our first Monday of March is March the 4th, and we are going to be hearing from Rabbi Mordecai Liebling on confronting the role of anti-Semitism in preserving power structures. This is a particularly timely moment. You may have heard that several members of the Labour Party in Britain renounced their membership in the Labour Party, in part because of anti-Semitism as voiced by the leadership. It's torn apart, it's divided in some ways, the progressive movement with the Women's March. And so looking at anti-Semitism as a tool of the power structure, I think, is useful in this time as we need to hang together as we move. And Mordecai is just an extraordinarily good speaker, and I'm sure you'll want to engage with him. I don't wish to take any more time away from our speaker, so I'm delighted to welcome back, and please give a warm welcome on this chilly evening to Sarah Ruden. We're so glad to have you with us. Welcome back. be totally remiss if I did not thank the Bible Association of Friends in America for their financial support for this whole series of lectures that Sarah will be delivering over the course of the next several months. All on Monday evenings. The next one, I believe, is April 22nd. April 22nd, and then Monday, June 24th. Subsequent will be on peace and nonviolence, shalom, and on June 24th, focused on justice. So these are three great themes of the Bible tonight: compassion. And thank you, Bible Association of Friends in America.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you all for being here. I'm just very, very delighted to be back at Pendle Hill and to be speaking to all of you.
You're not on.
Oh, I'm not on?
Let's flip the switch.
Okay, here I am. Okay.
She's on.
You can hear me in the back. I was just thanking you all very heartily. Okay. I hope you'll pardon me if I start toward the theme of compassion from way out yonder. I'm going to get where I'm going, I promise. The Song of Songs, or Song of Solomon, is one of the strangest and at the same time most beautiful books of the Bible. The first of these traditional titles is the more authoritative one. It's an English translation of the Hebrew title in the standard original text. The title suggests phrases like King of Kings and Lord of Lords, indicating the highest, best, and most powerful. The Song of Songs would thus be the most beautiful, moving, powerful song. But its very inclusion in Scripture has troubled a lot of people. It's a lushly, wildly erotic poem. It's no good trying to tame it down and claim that it's about faithful love within a conventional marriage or a theological symbolism, because it plainly depicts a whole range of the almost out-of-body passions that go with unsupervised courtship and sex. The speakers are very young and very deluded. They think they're going to live forever feeling just like this. Why is this a religious book? I have a partial answer through my own personal experience of the Hebrew text. Before I studied Hebrew, I'd always liked the book in English, but in a rather pretentious, literary way, the way I like English metaphysical poets. But no, the text of the Song of Songs in Hebrew had a solid beauty I could learn from. I remember mooning over the CDs that went with my teacher, Vicky Hoffer's own textbook, Biblical Hebrew. A few clauses of the Song of Songs are set to music, and that's by Stephen Scher and Dorothy Goldberg on one of the CDs. And the English, this is in the New Revised Standard Version, goes, "My beloved is mine and I am his. He pastures his flock among the lilies." And then, what is that coming up from the wilderness, perfumed with myrrh and frankincense? And the song goes, Do di li vanilo haraway ba shoshani do di li vani lo haraway ba shoshani do li Mekuteret moruluvana moruluvo, and on and on and that. That way.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Okay. When I performed the song for my own ear, everything came together. The inherent interest of sex and romance, the beauty of the music and words, and essentially the grammar. So here was the article, here was the affix, etc., etc., etc. They were working and showing me how to work, how to share the beauty of the original Bible with those who couldn't see or hear it otherwise. Much later, I would find myself talking to audiences around the country about what the Bible meant and the steep challenges of its main message. That message is, according to the Quaker motto displayed in my office at home, love thy neighbor, no exceptions. I had been seduced, sucked in the age-old way, through sensuality to commitment. I'd been educated, succumbing to the temptation of sweets, like the children the Roman poet Horace cites as an analogy to his own entertainment of his readers. Teachers give the kids pastries to induce them to learn their ABCs. That's why he makes his own poems so suave and so witty, so that he can draw otherwise unwilling people into his moral lessons. So, as for me, pretty soon, 2,000 years later, the Hebrew Bible could do whatever it wanted with me. I am a vigorous jaw grinder, which means that I have to have my teeth comprehensively rebuilt every few years. I had my mother's small-town dentist rebuild them during the years I was learning Hebrew at Yale, because he was cheaper, though he was quite good. While I reclined in the chair for a whole day, immobilized for 2 hours at a stretch, my jaw propped open and drills busy in there, my earphones were funneling into my brain sung Hebrew lessons from Vicky Hoffer's CDs. But I was weirdly relaxed, hardly noticing a physical intrusion that many people can hardly stand. The dentist wanted to know why, and I told him. He was a Sunday school teacher himself, and his face lit up when he put the earphones on. He did not want to give them back. So there are all kinds of theories about where the Song of Songs comes from. It obviously has something to do with pagan fertility rituals, Alexandrian pastoral poetry or bucolic poetry, pagan choral dances. It's got a lot to do with stuff like that. I don't think any of this is particularly troubling or even essential to what the poem does, which is to teach how to belong in society. I feel in my bones, as a poet myself, that the composers and compilers of authorized scripture texts simply couldn't stand and couldn't afford to throw away gorgeous, seductive material, no matter how distracting it might be on the surface, when their teaching task was so challenging. It was in fact more challenging than any teaching task in the history of the world, in my opinion. A lesson pointing towards selfless love, like the love an all-powerful God shows toward us. Just compare the way sex can help lead us through the moral life cycle. We start out our fertile years responding to the mere enticements of a relationship. Somebody who is cute and funny. Someone with whom we can go enjoyable places and do enjoyable things. Someone who can make our body feel good. And we're slowly drawn into responsibilities and commitments we never contemplate on our own. Not that it's a trick. If we're maturing at the right rate, we truly want responsibilities and commitments, even sacrifices. We love them in themselves. We love ourselves for being equal to them. This is how the Bible as a text helps teach humankind against all of our selfish instincts, the lesson of compassion, even to strangers, even to people we don't like. The Bible doesn't just tell us to be compassionate. That wouldn't make any impression, any more than it would make an impression on a 2-year-old if you told her to do the family taxes. The Bible works on us over time, drawing us in through its beauty, drama, and wit, and exercising our minds through its compelling arguments. The reason I'm so concerned with improving Bible translation is that the original languages naturally work more powerfully to carry out their seduction than, in the end, to make their case. In inculcating compassion, that very hardest of lessons, the Bible captures the attention, then the imagination, and then the intellect. I'd like to show you, by example, the different levels up through which the Bible draws us, so that we may end up accepting the weird lesson on which our civilization is built. If another person is in pain, that pain somehow belongs to all the others, so that any power they have carries some responsibility to know that pain and to do something about it. First of all, the Bible draws us in through sound and wordplay. In talking to audiences with all kinds of background, I find it a big challenge to convince them that the Bible in its original languages has a lot in common with children's songs, such as the Passover song, Just One Kid. I don't know if anybody knows it. It's one of these, okay, good. It's one of these cumulative songs, like I know one thing, aha, mio dea, I wouldn't know one thing, then 2, 3, 4, so on. Yeah, so it's a very playful type of song, really basically nonsensical. It's somewhat like the Noah song that's sung in Sunday schools, and I bet there are a lot of people here who know that song. Noah, build a floody, Lord said to Noah, there's gonna be a floody, get those animals out of the muddy children of the Lord. So rise and shine and give God your glory, rise and shine and give God your glory, rise and shine and give God your glory, children of the Lord. Okay, and you know the sound play with which that song goes on, the animals, they came in by twosies, elephants and kangaroosies. They came out by threesies, they'd learned about the birds and the beesies, and on and on. I now have extremely authoritative support, in my esteem for these songs, because Robert Alter has just brought out his complete translation of the Hebrew Bible, and he emphasizes sound and wordplay. And he has a very long, a very lofty career as a scholar and literary critic to back him up. Where I quibble with him is, first of all, in opining that he doesn't go far enough. Because he himself is an accomplished modern writer, he emphasizes mere literary performance, such as you'd find in Shakespeare or James Joyce. It's mainly about literary people admiring other literary people and young people being trained to admire the right things. That is, it's about aesthetics. I think that the aesthetics, while they're of course important, drive something a lot more important, which is attachment. Yes, a rhyme or a pun is going to help you remember something, so it's got an obvious role in education. But in the right context, it attaches you to other people, to a tradition, to a whole past and future. Think about how, when you're 8 or 9, or 11 or 12, and making lasting friendships, and your new friend, for example, shares a candy bar with you or teaches you a dance step. That physical experience draws you in and can make you permanently sympathetic toward that person. Think of the emotion with which we remember Passover songs or Christmas carols and the way they become about the people around us, though the meaning of the words can itself be rather silly or even nonsensical. And here's where I quibble again with Robert Alter. It isn't enough to explain the wordplay in footnotes to an English translation. He often does only that, throwing up his hands and calling jingles untranslatable. Being a competitive and, in fact, obnoxious scholar, my comparative ignorance does not hold me back. Here's, for example, how I render lines from the prophet Zephaniah that have a jingle which Robert Alter declares untranslatable. So, here's my translation. For Gaza shall be abandoned land, and Ascalon a town thrown down, Ashdod at noonday a displaced place, and Ekron torn entirely from the ground. So, yeah, I think anybody can do this. It's just important to be not too dignified, to just cultivate your inborn goofiness. And this jingle, I'm sure doesn't have any special intellectual depth to it. I'm really convinced that it didn't even have, to its original audience, much rational meat on its bones. I think it's mainly a jingle. But then again, think about a baby's experience of being rhythmically rocked by its mother and sung to about the purchase of mockingbirds and looking glasses and other consumer goods without instructions or warranties. That hasn't got any striking intellectual content either. But the physical experience is an excellent basis for being open to other people and for their welfare and their suffering to eventually become real to us. One level up from this, in the Bible's training of us in compassion, is the use of metaphor. The most powerful metaphors declare that one sentient being is another. That's kind of what supreme love is about between human beings. I see somebody else's suffering, even as strangers or enemies, and it's as if it's happening to me. I think many of us had impulses like this during the recent government shutdown. It was as if someone had taken away our salary, our children's food, the means to pay our heating bill. Our attitude toward the IRS, or people in MAGA hats, or whoever we weren't in the habit of liking became irrelevant. One morning after listening to the news, I just snapped. I had recently bought, through more economical sources in northwestern Pennsylvania, again, a year's worth of toiletries and a big load of mixed nuts and other imperishable food. I contacted the Connecticut Food Bank and went to my cupboards and started just throwing things into boxes. I believe that I could feel this unnatural, inconvenient way in part because the Bible had led me into it with metaphors, assuring me that it was a normal way to feel and that I wasn't just going crazy. I was used to thinking, for example, that God is the eagle who picks you up out of danger and flaps powerful wings and takes you to the safety of the sky. If we reason it out on a deeper level, one seemingly incompatible thing, more or less is another. Nature is providence. The tangible contains the unseen. Hope contains remedies. Mere hope contains remedies for despair. Everything is connected. Jesus says to his mother and a disciple at the crucifixion, woman, this is your mother, and here's your mother. One person effectively becomes another through compassion. This is at the same time a tremendous imaginative leap, and one that children are open to making. If a child is lonely, she might invent a second self, a friend. She can understand the parents saying, hey, leave that cat alone. You're as big as a house to that cat. And then suddenly she can understand, what it would be like to be her friend, what it would be like to be a helpless little cat. The magic show is expanded through narrative. Robert Alter has a lot to say over the years about the powerful rhythms of Hebrew prose and the need to render them authentically in English. And he's right, though I think his explanation is not. He stresses a rhythm called parataxis, which means that the clauses are lined up in roughly equal measure and emphasis, as in, this happened, and then that happened, and then this other thing happened. He compares this to Molly Bloom's soliloquy at the end of James Joyce's Ulysses. I think it's far more similar to ghost stories told around the campfire. But what makes both kinds of narrative and many others, evince something really powerful, is that the story is self-sufficient. It doesn't add because or although or even when. And in Hebrew, that kind of syntactical subordination is very rare, and it appears needlessly in standard English translations. That there's just no linguistic basis. They just make up, these explanatory clauses. But the Bible is really, the narrative is structured in the original version like the best kind of children's stories, those that don't preach, but instead show a set of events that may be supernatural, but are somehow deeply logical nevertheless, so that the mind leaps imaginatively. What if I were Miss Bianca, the aristocratic little mouse with the pearls, whose heart goes out to the innocent prisoner lying, otherwise forgotten, in rags in a dungeon, or the enslaved little orphan girl? What if I were the prisoner myself, or the orphan? The Bible is in fact energetic in getting us into the minds of such helpless people, and prodding to convince us that history is on our side if we help them. The first example that comes to my mind is the story of Joseph in Genesis. So Joseph barely escapes with his life from his jealous brothers, who sell him into slavery. After he has risen perilously and laboriously through the Egyptian regime and been falsely imprisoned and then landed on his feet as Pharaoh's right-hand man, after the famine has placed his starving family right where he wants them, in his complete power, a surprising but dramatically cogent ending ensues. Joseph, through trickery worthy of Game of Thrones, now has available as a hostage his family's youngest son, Benjamin, who has replaced him as the favorite son, the apparent only son of the favorite wife, because the family, Jacob, believes he's dead. Everybody back home believes that Joseph is dead. But instead of the Game of Thrones type ending, with Benjamin, say, skinned alive in front of the criminal brothers, and his tanned hide made into a colorful cloak and sent back to the self-pitying, passive father Jacob, we get this scene, and I'm using Alger's translation here. And Joseph came into the house, and they brought him the tribute that was in their hand into the house, and they bowed down to him to the ground, and he asked how they were, and he said, "Is all well with your aged father, of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" And they said, "All is well with your servant, our father. He is still alive." And they did obeisance and bowed down. And he raised his eyes and saw Benjamin, his brother, his mother's son, and he said, "Is this your youngest brother, of whom you spoke to me?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." And Joseph hurried out, for his feelings for his brother overwhelmed him, and he wanted to weep. And he went into the chamber and wept there. In the book of Matthew, we have another story with a shallowly counterintuitive but deeply logical ending. This story dramatizes traditional extended metaphors or conceits in a rather shattering manner. The imagery of God as a herder is pushed clear into the day of judgment to stress the existential importance of compassion. So here's new, just for a change, New International Version of the English text. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him. He will separate the people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And then you all know how this goes. I was hungry, you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, you invited me in. They don't understand. He says, "Truly, I tell you, when you did this for one of me, the least of your, whatever you did for one of the least of these brethren, brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Another step up in maturity in what the Bible offers for teaching is rhetoric, the art and science of persuasion that was at the center of ancient cultures. At times I've described biblical rhetoric in classical terms, with words like anti-metabole, which is just repeating a phrase in reverse order. And both the Hebrew and Greek texts do a lot of this kind of thing, which sometimes looks, mainly decorative. But the genius of ancient rhetoric is to marry form and function. The Hebrew Bible makes pretty extensive use of analogy, for example. Commands us to treat people under our power mercifully because, it says, you were slaves in Egypt. It's a repeated stricture in Deuteronomy, which is, so to speak, the constitutional book of the Bible. It's all about limitations of power for the common good. And analogies are intellectually very fertile. People are always saying, "Oh, that's not right, that's not a very tight analogy." But the mere discussion is usually proves extremely useful. I wanted to wind up here with a final illustration of the role of rhetoric in the teaching of compassion. So this is my own translation of Mark chapter 7. The story, the Syro-Phoenician woman. She's a Canaanite, and she's of the Phoenician race. And what's kind of important to keep in mind about them is this incredible, theological and ritual difference from Jews in the ancient world. Phoenicians would sacrifice children, small children. And they were doing this just way into the historical period. Here's this encounter. From there, Jesus set off and went out into the district of Tyre. He entered a house because he didn't want anyone to know of his arrival, but he wasn't successful in escaping notice. On the contrary, a woman whose little daughter was possessed by an unclean spirit heard about him right away and came and groveled at his feet. But the woman was part of the Greek world and Syro-Phoenician by ethnicity. She asked him to throw the minor demon out of her daughter, and he said to her, "First allow the children to eat their fill, as it's not fitting to take a loaf of bread from the children and toss it to the little doggies." But she answered back, telling him, "Master, even the little doggies under the table eat some of the children's scraps." And he said to her, "What you say prompts me to say, go on, get out of here, because the lesser demon has gone out of your daughter." And she went back to her house and found her little child sprawled on the bed, the minor demon having gone out of her. So the main change that I've made here is simply to translate the diminutives, the words for little things, as such, as they actually appear in the original text, and the special attention to the diminutive that appears actually nowhere else in Scripture, either in the Greek Christian Scriptures, except in another version of this story in the book of Matthew, or in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible that was widely used in antiquity, the Septuagint. So this word is kunarion. Doesn't mean puppy, doesn't mean miniature dog. It means little doggy poo. It's a cute word. It's just a cute, deprecating word. And it appears, the place this word is at home is in Greek comedy, alongside, obscene insults, and in witty repartee. It's a word that, it's kind of this street word, and it's crept bizarrely, it's crept into the Gospels in this place, and it's never translated accurately, I think, up to now anywhere, which I find appalling. So you got to think how this works as a piece of rhetoric. You have this witty repartee, and it's gone like way down in register. So you see in the standard text, he's kind of, thundering at the sort of, "Thou dog, how canst thou approach me?" That's like the tone of biblical language in English translations as we have them, as we know them from our childhood. But it doesn't sound like that. That is not the tone of the exchange. So the meaning of the exchange is changed. When you actually understand what the words are. So this is how I see the exchange working. These two people have wildly different cultures and visions of the world. And the woman's are headed, into the oblivion of history. If you translate the passage accurately, as a witty little debate that the woman actually wins, she's allowed to win, this helps bring out the bigger lesson. We can encounter each other respectfully and even compassionately, simply as human beings, in spite of our differences, because we all suffer. It's hard, it's partial, and it's temporary. But to achieve it all is a miracle. And in achieving this miracle, we're helped by the Bible's miraculous power to communicate. Okay, that's me. I've blathered on for quite a while here. So I think there is time for discussion now. And
there is, and we are recording this, although not live streaming tonight. So if you'll wait until I get to you, and if you'll hold the microphone right below your lower lip, you will be heard by the people here and who watch us later. So we get both the question and the answer. Could I take a privilege here as the microphone holder? Sure.
Could we stop you?
Before we started this evening, you were mentioning the story of the Good Samaritan, and I think I might have forgotten to mention that Sarah is at work on a translation of the Gospels for the Modern Library, and this is work that is ongoing, and we're all looking forward to seeing that translation when it comes out. But it seems to me a follow-up to the Syrophoenician woman's story of strangers, and you were distinguishing compassion versus pity. And I'm wondering if you might elaborate for the whole group on our discussion a little bit earlier.
Right. Yeah. This is another example of where, the Bible's word choice is really incredibly important and may be completely invisible in the standard translation. You have a fairly rare expression for pity, which means to feel it in your guts. There's an ordinary word for pity, and it's just all over the place in pagan literature. You find it, of course, in scripture too. And it's used for generally for somebody powerful, deigning to relieve from suffering, to reprieve from punishment, somebody at a lower level. So this is kind of a noblesse oblige kind of pity. Oh, shame. Let me rescue you. And it's not going to, because I'm so powerful, it's not going to cost me much. A different verb altogether, the feel in the guts verb, is used in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Here's the Good Samaritan. He's going on his way, and he is in Jewish territory. He's making this journey through people who are generally very hostile to him, and he sees a Jewish man who's been robbed, beaten, and left for dead. And he felt it in his guts. So he didn't, there was no kind of reasoning and evaluation here. He just immediately, he's shown, he binds up the man's wound, he loads the man on his donkey, he interrupts his journey, he spends money, and since this man is, the Samaritan is unaccompanied, he's driving alone, he's not a rich man. He's somebody who's struggling economically and fighting to make a living, but he actually, and he does this incredibly, reckless thing. He leaves the guy with an innkeeper, and innkeepers are notorious in the ancient world as being swindlers. And he says, just take care of him. Whatever you spend, I'll pay you back. So he basically invites himself to be fleeced, because he can't stay with the guy, but he wants at least to guarantee that he'll have care. And he just does all these things in a quick succession. Okay, paratactical narrative. Does one thing, does another. He's just led by human nature in the strange kind of elevated manifestation. I see you suffering, it's like it was me. I'm going to act as urgently as if it were me, because you are actually, you've become kind of a part of my body. I feel your suffering in my guts. So that's a metaphor, of course, the guts, the inward part compels us somehow to do things for other people. The scientists tell us that this is a completely human quality, and that we like to think that our dogs feel this emotion. No, they don't. So is that what you were getting at?
It is.
Okay.
Thank you. Questions or comments? First of all, thank you so very much. I'm so glad you come back to us in this way for another round of...
Thank you for having me.
Doesn't she wear her scholarship lightly? That's why I always think of her. Let me get this person first and I'll come back.
Hi, Sarah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So you mentioned Robert Alter's translation.
Yes.
And in addition to being a literary translation, he also goes out of his way to avoid translating the words soul and spirit.
Yes.
So at his, I have his Psalms, his 23rd Psalm.
Mm.
There's no "restoreth my soul" in his translation. And so I wonder what you think about that, his diligence in not translating these words that have metaphysical connotations as well as, you know.
Yeah, so he means, and I think this is very productive, necessary work. He strips away theological accretions, which are, I mean, they go to incredible lengths. If you look at, you know, certain stages, for example, in the Lord's Prayer, it was thought, you know, in late antiquity, that this was not daily bread, that this was super substantial bread. It was the bread of transcendence, like the bread that's transfigured in the Mass, you know, actually becoming flesh, physically, really. So that was then embodied already in this weird kind of, you know, pseudo-philosophical mistranslation. So yeah, Alter is like stripping all this away. It's very good. And yeah, the ancient Hebrews had no conception of a disembodied soul, you know, an abstract soul. No, everything is physical. You know, everything is physical to the extent that God has, you know, a face, hands, feet, you know, a back. There's a back side to God. So yeah, very incredibly useful work that he does here.
Hold it really close, he looks like. That's good.
Thank you so much. I have so many questions. It's hard to choose one. But I'm thinking a lot about decolonization. I live and work with the Lenape Indian tribe of Delaware.
Oh my goodness.
I long to avoid the term lord, as in landlord, lord of the plantation that owns our beings, you know, this concept that is constantly referred to in American history terminology, in our legal documents, the year of our Lord, 2018, year 19. And so I'm trying to figure out what it was back then. And what did an Aramaic speaking boy think? and why do we call him Lord? And what could we call him? And how could we find a new way to speak about this being that does not smack of ownership? Since Native Americans, and from what I understand, some of the Hebrew children's worldview didn't include owning land.
Right.
So help me. And then I have a dozen other questions.
Okay.
Save the dozen other for after, but we're good.
An incredibly good question.
I'm so glad you.
I'm gonna make you come back and do the next talk for me. I'm gonna stay in Connecticut and just hand it over to you for April. No, that's a fantastic question. And the answer actually goes in a couple of directions. And the hinge on which it turns is the so-called diachronic problem. That you don't have you don't have a point with the Bible, you don't have a point in history where you say, aha, this is the original text. And this is the original audience. I carelessly and for convenience talk about, an original text, Hebrew, Greek, an original audience, Hebrews Jews at the time of the Second Temple was built, and that's when the scriptures were coming together. Or early Christians, in the house churches. But no, everything we've got in the Bible is just sort of careening through history. From oral literature that is prehistoric, it might be going back 10,000 years to the oral literature of shamans. It's probably pre-linguistic, some of it. It's about, magic, the first magic rites that people were doing and thinking about an afterlife, an underworld, an unseen world, forces of nature that have personality. You have that problem certainly when you're talking about Lord, because again, I shouldn't be watching something as violent as Game of Thrones, but I do watch it. And a lot of us have got that imagery, of lordship in our minds. This is incredibly brutal, very materialistic kind of lordship. So yeah, it'd be wonderful to dump that word. Here's just a sketch of its history in Hebrew. Yahweh is this very important word, among a bunch of words for God. Very important one is Yahweh, which is associated with the territory of Judea. It's basically, they're linguistically related. So Yahweh is the Judeans' God, and he becomes the single Jewish God. And that word has been associated with being. This is, by some accounts, simply the word for being. I haven't gone into it linguistically, but this is the way the Bible itself understands it. God says, I am that I am. So he's playing on this term, Yahweh. And that was too sacred and too mysterious a word to say at some point, so they started replacing it. And the term that replaces it, you don't read Yahweh when you read the Hebrew text. You read Adonai, which means my Lord. Who on earth knows what a Lord meant? It probably meant a bunch of things. The head of the household, the local potentate, the nobility, anybody, an elder or something. Anybody in a leadership position probably could be my Lord. It's probably just a general term of respect. Like rabbi, we say that means teacher, but it means my great one. There were these terms of respect that were just commonly used. And but Lord in Greek, it can mean like somebody in political power. It could also mean sir. It's just a respectful way to talk to somebody in the street. Hey, sir. So I think we have a lot of leeway in replacing Lord, and I think it's really wonderful to hear from people who have had really bad experiences of lordship in one form or another. It's wonderful to hear their opinion about what they would like to see there. But then the translation problem goes another way. And you have somebody like Augustine. So around the year 398, 99, he's this definite historical person with a very well-known historical point of view, sits down and he writes a very personal story of his life called the Confessions. It really means testimonies. And it's got like hundreds of instances of the Latin version of Lord, Domine, he liked every other sentence, oh God, oh this, God that, and the other is pouring out his soul. He's probably having a mental breakdown. And probably because, I mean, we know this much about him. Not probably, but it might be because he had just searing hemorrhoids, and he was too, no, serious, this is a serious theory about it. He was in too much pain to sit or to lie down. All he could do was stand and kneel. He did that for about a month, and he was just pouring out the story to 2 or 3 secretaries who were desperately writing it down. I'm not kidding you. This is a theory of Robin Lane Fox, who's not an undistinguished scholar. And we know exactly the image of the Lord that he's talking about, because we can place him with so much precision. He means a slave owner. He means the head of the household who owned the women and children and the slaves and ruled with an iron fist and was legally pretty much unassailable, even this late in antiquity. And he depicts God in this very way. God is a slave owner who I run away, he runs me down, he whips me into submission, he tortures me. It's all for my own good. He had that kind of difficult relationship with God. And when you know it that well, you don't write Lord. It's too vague. It's not brutal enough. You write Master. Because that's what he's talking about. So, I don't mean to sort of join in the brutality of that culture, but I think maybe it's arguably progressive also to see that culture for what it is, if you actually know what it is, and talk about this guy's really difficult relationship with God when he was brought up this way. So you take it this way, towards something kinder. You may have to take it this way, simply to be honest about what you're looking at in the text. And I think both are necessary given the range of text that you have to deal with.
Thank you.
And what about the word creator?
Right.
What about the word creator? I think a lot of people like that word. It may not be appropriate, but I think a lot of people appropriate the word because it's inclusive. It's about creating. How would you dissect that with respect to your frame of reference? I mean, does that have any legitimacy in your mind to use a word like creator? Because I think people use it blindly because it feels good.
Exactly, and it's a fairly complicated word. I'll just take the Latin version because I know the most about that. Having worked with Augustine for so intensively, he would tend to use the word, and this is really interesting. He was a really very powerful and very creative interpreter of the Bible, very imaginative, but he kind of did know a lot about language, so he was attached to what was there. And he uses the word, he likes the word auctor, which doesn't really mean creator at all. It means increaser. And the Roman emperors, starting with Augustus, loved this word. We didn't make all this, but we create prosperity. We make things grow. We're like a human fertility god. Sort of on that distant basis, Augustine really likes the word auctor for creator. And if you read Genesis, creation isn't ex nihilo, it's not from nothing. It's from, material that is not there, that's already there, but it's not formed. So it is, made orderly and made to increase, and so you're creating these fish, these birds and plants and species, and they increase, you get them going, and you create the richness, of functional creation out of that. So that's just the one way that the concept of creation is kind of cool in sacred writing. I know less about the word in Hebrew and in Greek. Is this helpful at all?
Thank you very much.
Translation is important, but I understand that we have the words of Jesus in a few places in Aramaic, in the Gospels, in, I think Mark did 3 places of quotes in Aramaic. What is your understanding about why they are included rather than translations?
Well, can you give me an example of one of them? Because I'm not drawing them. I ought to know about it.
Kum.
Oh, yes. Girl, get up.
Right.
Yes.
So why
It's Kumi, isn't it? Kumi.
K-O-U-M, I feel like.
It's got an I sound on the end.
Okay, fine.
I think the point is just go forward with it.
It's all right, sorry.
Why? I mean, I've heard ideas that maybe those phrases that were included, there's 3 or 4 in Mark, had some magical.
Go ahead and give the full.
I've heard that it said that maybe those 3 or 4 phrases in Aramaic that have come down to us in Mark have some magical powers. But I don't that doesn't make sense to me. I just wondered what you thought about it.
This is something that I would have to research to give you a sensible answer at all. Right now, I could just stand here and speculate and have a lot of fun, but I might be leading people down the garden path. I think that sounds like, if you wanted to take the research in that direction, if you had evidence for that, you could probably make a pretty good case for that. You would look for evidence, say, on magical tablets, on magical objects. You would find these really ancient prayers in which the magical language is preserved. And one important thing about it is it's different. It is not the common way of speaking. So to Greek speakers, speaking this cosmopolitan, hoam, koine Greek, in which you trade salt and grain, this Aramaic, unfamiliar, strange Aramaic phrase has this wonderful, it's got this special quality to it. So I think that argument could probably be made. You also have this sort of scientific interest, and that's where the Septuagint translation, that's why they had it in the first place. So, late in the final millennium, BC era, the Alexandrians, and a lot of Jews, in fact, cosmopolitan Jews were living in Alexandria, so they could be good informants, but Greeks there who were ruling Egypt, got this heavy interest in anthropology. So that's why we have this very old translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek. They were translating all kinds of things. They're translating, Babylonian things and Egyptian, and so anybody who's got this really old, special, sacred text, we want it, and we want to translate it, and we want to think about their culture. So this was just like a mad rush, this great flowering of anthropology. What do they say? What do they think? What do they do? And you got a lot of nonsense developing there too, yeah. So everybody's women are, wildly promiscuous. Everybody's women but ours, but there's that interest too. So when you talk about the New Testament as or the Gospels certainly as a translation, you go back to Alexandria and you think, aha, there are Greeks, who are just fascinated by the strange Palestinian culture. So they think it's really cool, that you can hear this guy's language. It's like, Star Trek. You've got like various languages of aliens, and it's part of it jazzes up the narrative. It's a literary, it could be just a literary thing. That's another way I could speculate about it. But I am speculating. What do you think?
Thank you. In the Odyssey, Homer uses formulaic formulas, like little phrases, like wily Ulysses, and the rosy-fingered dawn that breaks. Is there language like that you've discovered in your study of Hebrew or Christian scriptures? Is language used in that way, like in formulas that evoke certain characteristics repetitively?
Oh yes, yeah. There's certainly it is, I do get into trouble for insisting on this, but Mediterranean was really long before the Bible appeared. Mediterranean is a small place and very active. And you have a lot of seafaring peoples, not Jews, but people are trading and bringing ideas back, and swapping literature, and certainly Hebrew scriptures. It's in part an amalgam. They didn't have, for example, their own creation story. They borrowed one, or two, in fact. Yeah, so you see these influences, and you can see, for example, these epithets. They're not okay. Agamemnon, right, in Homer, is Poimenelao. He is the shepherd of the people. And that's just repeated over and over again. Shepherd of the people. So, the Lord is my shepherd. Right? So the shepherd, you have the same imagery. You have it all over the Middle East, in fact. That the king is the shepherd of the people. He's a kindly, protective leader of these sort of passive animalistic creatures. Or that's the use of it in, say, god-kingship. So you have familiar images which are expressed similarly, epithets that come up again and again and again. So the God is he is the Lord of hosts, that is, he's the leader of armies. And those are the stars in the sky. So you look up and you see God is leading the stars across the heaven. And this is countless army of heavenly creatures who will come to the rescue of Israel when Israel is in trouble. You have lots of parallels there. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. It's very interesting thinking about the Bible in terms of various translations. And clearly, there are reasons for various mistranslations, like not understanding the culture of the people who wrote the text that one is translating or not fully understanding the language that one is translating. But it also seems as if perhaps at times you've referred to something that seems to be intentional mistranslation. I'm thinking about your reference to the little doggy poo that hasn't been properly translated until now. What are your thoughts about this intentional mistranslation as a concept and what it might be about?
Yeah. Now, I hesitate, in my book, Face of Water, I do discuss this, and I express my hesitation about being very judgmental about it, because, I did spend some time, as a visiting scholar at Yale Divinity School, and that's where the New Revised Standard Version was put together. It was an ecumenical effort. It was a work of a committee, like the King James itself. And, I really hesitate to, go after these very learned scholars and people who are committed to their faith communities. I be very reluctant in most instances to accuse anybody of bad faith. So what happens, see, scholar X, is just looking at, he has it's absolutely plain to him. He knows the word dog, it's cool. It looks nothing like kunarion or kunidium. There's a sort of parallel slang word for little doggy poo. He knows what he's looking at. But then, his hands pause above the keyboard. He sees some faces in the congregation, either around him, possibly in front of him. He hears in his mind his parents' reaction to little doggy poos. He hesitates out of compunction, out of reverence, out of not wanting to impose, maybe, but not wanting to impose, his cleverness on a tradition, a translation tradition that is part of a faith tradition. So he hangs back. But I really think that he kind of needs a prod, or the tradition needs a prod, because people make the mistake of not following through and seeing how the text works. To do that, I think you need literature hounds like Robert Alter. People will say, no, it actually works. Or somebody like me who, in translating Augustine, Master, not Lord, say, no, it actually works. He means that a relationship with God is very, very difficult. It wasn't, he didn't have his conversion and then float off onto a cloud. No, he had decades more very difficult service and doubts, and pain, and loneliness, and all of the things that are challenges in his life. He had all of that, and he had to reconcile with that, the idea of a loving, merciful God. So, yeah, he just, it's pretty clear, he had this passive-aggressive, relationship with God. He loved him and he hated him, which is a natural way to feel. It's just a human way to feel. I like him more, I respect him more, I reverence him more than I would any plaster saint. So, yeah, I say, you see that word, don't just translate it, don't just call it as you see it, but also follow through. and grapple with the meaning of this text. And the more startling the meaning is, likely the more spiritual benefit that you're going to derive from it. That's my idea.
Thank you.
Don't take the easy way. Was there
I love that.
I thought I'd just add the thing, going back full circle to your Songs of Solomon, the beloved is referred to as a ro'eva shoshanim, a shepherd among the roses, so.
It's lilies,
you know,
lilies.
Well, they can be roses or lilies, sometimes they're one or the other. But I wanted to ask you, when you had talked about the word for Adonai means my God, but actually Adoni is my God. What is this about this Adonai? It's sort of like there's a plural, and does that refer to? I always wondered about that.
Right. I never quite got it. The form is different, slightly different for a human Lord than for a divine one. This is what was pointed out to me in Hebrew class. That's about as far as I understand. Yeah, and you're right. My would have that E sound.
Yeah,
Right.
Adoni, and so
And
I
I
wonder.
think that's the human overlord. But it's definitely pronounced Adonai
Yes,
when you're talking about God.
which would be my gods,
Right.
and so but.
This is
but
another
this
plural
is-
like Elohim.
Okay, so you
Probably.
think that's it?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. This what she's referring to here, when we talk about plurals for God, a major word for God in Hebrew is actually plural, gods. Grammatically, it's perfectly straightforward. And this is a plural. It's not probably very likely not translatable as plural, except when it actually is, in context.
But sometimes it is singular because we see El also. But
Yes.
it's singular.
El is definitely singular.
Say that again.
So that's a word for God. El.
Singular Elohim being plural. Well,
Yes,
this is why I'm asking, because you see El and you also see Elohim, but you seem consistently to see Adonai. So I sort of always wondered about it. So
It looks like a plural.
yes, it is a
Yeah.
plural.
Yes. Yeah.
It means it's definitely, because the singular is Adonai. So I just thought, is it plural? Because clearly we're not talking about or praying to more than one God. Is the plural given because of it gives a sort of this more greatness because it's plural? I just was always wondered about that.
Yeah, the scholars of religious history say it's totally straightforward. This is an inheritance from polytheism.
Okay.
Yeah. No, they don't have any hesitation in saying, yeah, this is.
Because I wonder about that.
Yeah. No, that's what they say. And they have lots of evidence. A lot of evidence is in, the Hebrew Bible text itself, where you have these, for example, these idols, and you see that the pastoral stage, the people have these fetishes, which are being treated as gods. These idols that they're hauling around. They're very important. You have that. It goes clear through, the Christian scripture when Paul is talking about, daimonia, which are gods, little ones, but the universe is just totally it's monotheism, schmonotheism, it doesn't, you have the supreme God, right, but that doesn't put aside, the existence of that doesn't, deny the existence of many, many gods all over the place. And a lot of if you look at, the Hebrew Bible in historical terms, a lot of this, under the surface, you're just talking about major religious wars, where this tribe has this territory, they've got this god, so when they expand their territory, this god has to be worshipped. That's how you know who's in charge. My God, right? My God's bigger than your God, and we can make you sacrifice to this God. When we say there are no other gods, what we're actually saying, in a sort of, brutal militaristic sense, before the theology comes into it, which it does, of course, kind of with a vengeance, but if we're talking this in a prehistoric period where God's all over the place, and it's a fight to the death for which one you can establish as, first of all, the primary one, and then the only one. That's why you have Elohim. God's all over the place.
Wow.
So it's like they take, it's as if, you've got the L, singular, and we're just totally sick of talking about anybody else's gods, so we're just going to kind of group them all together. We round them up, like a herd of sheep, and all the gods belong to us. And yes, they're all together, but we're going to just say there's one of them. So effectively, yes, we've got them all, and we're going to make one big personality out of it.
Do we get that out of?
Do I shock you?
Do we get that out of? Is that coming through?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sitting right under it. Thou shalt have no other god before me.
Before me,
And it
yes.
doesn't say there aren't any others.
Glaring evidence. Ours is the top one, right? And a jealous one. He's jealous of the others.
Right. We have time for one more question.
I just wanted to give a little bit of time. When you're in the face of water, I had this sense, after spending your whole career mostly in Greek and Latin, then to suddenly plunge into Hebrew.
In middle age.
A little later in your career.
Yes.
I kind of felt like there was this whole entire other book sort of under the surface about this experience of taking on this language, which is so rough and abrupt and short. I don't think I will ever read the narrative of David and Bathsheba the same again. Was it the Bahi instruction, the low, and lo, it came to pass? No, it was, and then this happened.
Bahi?
Bahi.
Yeah.
I just wondered if you just had any sort of, what didn't make it into the book about this experience of these translations, which are shocking to me, as in your anecdote about your classmate, the Protestant, I guess, translated it, and the Hebrew professor just tearing him after. He's like, no, that's not what that says. That how we translate, and it's like, crap, and then this happened. As opposed to, and lo, it came to pass.
Right. He said, here's what happened for anybody who hasn't read the book. So, this was the advanced Hebrew class, third year at Yale Divinity School. And there were, I think, 10 or a dozen students, and I'm the only, these are all young guys. I'm the only, one semester there's a woman in the class. Otherwise, I'm the only woman, there's an older woman in there. And the professor, this is Joel Baden, is a wonderfully witty and creative teacher, and Jewish. And So most of these guys are Protestants. And the guy who said he translates in the typical Protestant way. See, he happened to be a Mormon, brilliant student, but he sort of translated it the way he'd heard it in English. He says, and it came to pass. And Joel snaps at him and he says, that phrase only exists in the version of the Bible that's playing in your head 24 hours a day. And he's, yeah. He also sort of flayed us, about the correct translation of hine, which is lo and behold, lo, which is, in this day and age, who's saying lo, come on. Anyway, so we're reading Genesis, and we come to this part, where Joseph has this weird dream. And then he wakes up and, lo, hine, it's a dream. But it just says hine, dream, Hebrew word for dream. And so the translation that the only translation that Joel was happy with was shit. I hate to offend anyone, but it's like shit, dream. Patriarch, he sees his bride coming, with the camels, shit, camels, and it's not like voila, the sort of demonstrative French joke. Look, behold this, I gesture at it. No, it's wakening up. Sometimes literally, I noticed this. I am surprised. I completely refocused.
Not oi.
Vicky Hoffer, she, for her part, Vicky Hoffer is an older Jewish woman. She's retired now. She's not teaching, but mother of 5 daughters and matriarch, Jewish matriarch, and a reader in synagogues. So perfect, pronunciation. So she ran for Purim one year. At the time of Purim, she did a Purim play for Yale Chapel. Yeah. So there were plenty of oy veys there. But we did that. It was mostly done in Hebrew. So I wasn't advanced enough to play anybody but a reveler and a horse. So I was horse. This is the Esther story. So the hero gets to ride the horse in triumph. Yeah. So she had. It's kind of, in more liberal Jewish communities, the Purim plays just a drag show, and so she had the women play by men, and Queen Vashti has this pink Disney crown that has LED lights in it, so it's like flashing, and she. What this taught me is just a really, really important lesson. The Bible is a screen, and it's just embedded in the text. Christian and Jewish scripture. It's full of the fun stuff, and it's not necessarily irrelevant or disrespectful. To enjoy it for what it is. And that to me is part of celebrating it. Bible's a blast. Did I tell them last time about the snake and the couple in the garden?
I don't remember.
Sally's heard it. Sally was at the 92nd Street Y and heard me, but so I'll crave her patience and okay.
No joke is worth repeating.
All right. There's this sick pun, in the Garden of Eden story. Okay, so the only way that you can bring this out in English is to say that the couple they were nude, but the snake, he was shrewd. It's arum and arumim, so it sounds like the singular and the plural of the same word. They're different words, of course, but it's a stupid pun, and to my mind, just completely meaningless. Except, are you ever going to forget that now that there was this couple and there was a snake and there was trouble then? Because the snake, happened to be smarter than this naked couple. Yeah, that's what it is. And you got to enjoy it for what it is, and you have to embrace it, for the joy that it can give you.
I say give it up for Sarah. And Sarah is actually staying with us this week. And she's doing work at the University of Pennsylvania in classics.
In classics department.
In the classics department. And she's going to be staying with us then the next time she speaks and the following time. So if you're really curious, you might want to make an arrangement to have dinner with Sarah some night. Then her time is her own and she needs to manage it, but I would imagine, given how generously she shared with us her insights and humor. I have never heard the Bible is really a blast before myself. So you might want to do that. In other words, and if you wish to continue the conversation, I invite you to do so with refreshments out in the foyer and the kitchenette.
Yeah, and can I just invite you all to come back next time, bring friends, and I would love to see you all again. It's April 22nd, right?
April 22nd.
What?
June 24th.
June 24th. Okay.
Is it okay for us to come to drag?
You can come in anything you want. Be comfortable.
Thank you.